And thank you for joining this last session of the day, which is on operational experiences and how to help make events better from the operational standpoint. I'm Dimitris Vasiliadis. I'm the managing director for Thridium, and what we do is we work on technology for safer events. I'm very happy and excited to be in the company of three amazing panelists who will help me go over the subject of operations during events and share with us some best practices that hopefully will resonate with everybody in the room. First, I'll start with the lady of the group, Bev Ward. She led the original bid for England to host the Women's Euros in 2022 and brought huge success for English women's football as a result. And she has been also the lead on managing the host cities throughout the delivery of the Women's Euro. Currently, she works for the FA as a consultant on the bid to host the Men's Euro in 2028. Rick Robbins works for the Met Office as Head of Operational Expertise Propositions, and he's accountable for the products that sit at the core of expert weather services offered by the Met Office. And one of the things Rick does within his role is demonstrate the exploitation opportunities and the management of threats caused by various weather events. Last but not least, my friend, Paul Townsend, Director of Crowd Dynamics International. Crowd Dynamics works as a specialist company in crowd movement and behavior. And Paul works across all sectors and sizes, from major events to stadia, arenas, and festivals, train stations, museums, and attractions. And his work is on better understanding and analyzing crowd movement and behavior and assessing overall the visitor experience in these events. So I think we've done enough of introduction, so let's get right to the meat of the topic. It's really good that we have this diversity in the panel from the point of view that you all bring different experiences from your roles. So in your background, what are the main challenges that are faced when planning, running, or supporting an event? Bev, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I think we kind of touched upon this in an earlier panel around major events delivery. It's really understanding the vision, the objectives of the event, the sort of framework and competition of the event from the International Federation, understanding the budget, and then working out the project timeline to get you from start to delivery. On Women's Euro, we ended up with 3.5 years to plan the event because we had a year's delay with COVID. And worked with 9 different host cities and 10 different venues and 32 different training venues, 32 different hotels. So a complex project to manage across multiple stakeholders and keep everyone focused on delivering our vision to achieve records, a record-breaking tournament, but also to deliver with excellence for all of the client groups and the spectators as well.
And what was the one thing that really worked well and made it such a big success?
Creating a team. It was having great people, not just within our local organising structure held at the English FA, but with UEFA, the International Federation, with the broadcasters, with the host cities, with the venues. Everyone became singly driven behind a goal to create a big difference for women's football and women's sport. Everyone knitted together, and we've left this really wonderful legacy of, in my area, of cities now working together and sharing best practice and coming together as a group and bringing cities who are less experienced at delivering major sports events, bringing their skills and knowledge level up, which makes a difference for the sort of circular economy of UK sports events in the future.
Okay, great, thank you. Rick?
So I think for me, 2 things. One is awareness, weather risk awareness. And then also accessibility to the sort of information that you need at the planning phase, but also when you're sort of tactically delivering an event. So the UK Met Office is there as the National Met Service of the UK. Our role is to keep people safe and to help them thrive. And to do that, we need to work with organisations who can work with us and work with people to make that happen. And I think across many aspects of event management and also sport, I think there's a very varied understanding of weather risks, and there's very varied use of weather information in your planning. And we've seen what's happened over the last couple of years. We had a heat wave where temperatures reached over 40 degrees in the UK. I joined the Met Office nearly 40 years ago. This is my 40th year. And as a forecaster, it never occurred to me that we would see temperatures of 40 degrees in the UK. We usually break records, temperature records, once every 10, 20, 50 years by about 0.2, 0.3 of a degree. We smashed it by 1.5 degrees this year, and over a massive area, all the way up the East Coast main line, railway line. All of the towns that sit up there were recording over 40 degrees, which is unheard of. We didn't expect that. The scientists didn't expect that, but that's the territory we're in now. We've seen the thunderstorms that have occurred recently. During the summer, there was a tragedy in Germany where a tube station was flooded and people tragically lost their lives. We had the same in New York a couple of years ago. When we're looking at event management, part of that is allowing people to travel safely from event home. And it worries me that we're in a position maybe where I don't quite understand the risks that we're putting people into at times. So, part of my job is to raise awareness, but also to try and give access to the level of expertise and the information that you need in a way that's easy, affordable, always on, that sort of thing. So I think that's, for me, where I set the sort of challenges.
Can I just add to that, having lived through that heat wave, and 3 of our 4 weeks of delivery of Women's Euro was in a heat wave, and of course you kind of tried to prepare for hot weather in the summer, but no one could have prepared for that heat wave. And we had one game in Rotherham, our last group game, where 8 o'clock at night at kickoff it was 35 degrees. We had 1,000 Iceland fans doing their fan march and their thunderclap through the town centre of Rotherham, and just trying to keep them safe, putting in the extra welfare, first aid, extra water supplies, extra shade in fan zones, as well as then looking after the players and officials, fans within the stadium with free drinking water, extra cooling breaks. That was unprecedented, but also the impact on the transport infrastructure, because so many train lines went down because the tracks were too hot for the trains to run safely. So that actually, I think for sports events going forward in the summer is going to be a major factor in how we prepare ourselves better for that weather.
Thanks, Bev. That's an excellent pass for Paul, perhaps, because he's the crowd expert.
Yeah, plenty of water. So I think the first thing is that I'm filling in for my colleague, Jocko Callahan, who focuses a lot on designing and operational planning to get the best experience at events. So I've got some notes in front of me that have come from her to get her input as well as my own. My own experience is also an experience, but very related to crowds, how crowds move, how they behave, and how we manage them. From a consultant's perspective of helping our clients plan their events, the challenge often that we have is getting operational planning thought about early enough in the process. And the same, Jock said the same to me about experience. How do we think about experience early on? What are we defining as the experience we want for people, and how do we plan those operations to get that experience? And quite often it's thought about very late on. So you might design the overlay for an event or be designing a master plan around a major event. And then there's a handover to operational planning and there's a little bit of overlap. And actually the main challenge is to get those thoughts from planning the operations worked into the design and the concepts at the early stages, because that will gain the best experience for the people at the end of the day.
Okay. That's great, thank you. So you all touched upon the operational side, the planning side, seeing risks risks that we haven't come across before. So I guess that all this is imposing new considerations when it comes to the operational side of events. While at the same time, we know that events also operate from the revenue maximization perspective. So how much planning and how much operational control can we have in place that will balance also the fact that an event at the end of the day needs to deliver a very good experience to the people attending it and also deliver the revenue expectations? Who would like to take that first? Yeah?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I think one of the things is there's a bit of a lack of understanding about the fact that making efficiencies, as it's called, which is cutting costs in operational planning, can decrease revenue because you're decreasing the experience that people have of the event. You know, the experience is not just about the big screen that you see or necessarily the technology that you use. It's overall experience. If you cut costs and reduce resources for operational planning, then you've got a direct impact on the experience that the visitors are having. That means that they spend less on the site, they spend less on merchandise, they have a worse time, they give poorer reviews and so on. And it applies to all sorts of events, whether major city-scale events, venues holding events, and so on. There's a real lack of understanding and driving, you know, I like to call them bean counters, with apologies to anyone who's involved in finance in the room. But they're driving down costs to say this is a more efficient event, when actually they're probably driving down the revenue that's got from the event. And if you look at it the other way, better operations means more revenue, and you can link the two.
We just delivered Women's Euro at a slight loss. UEFA had the biggest broadcast and commercial revenues that they've ever had for the women's game, but we still strongly felt that investing in the game and investing in the infrastructure and the quality of delivery was the best thing to do to grow the game. And we did have a range of different stadium sizes, which helped to minimise some of the revenue outlay. But it was absolutely about bringing new fans to the game and making sure they had a really great experience along the way. So no matter which stadium we went to, you still had the same level of consistent spectator experience through the city, at the stadium, getting back home again afterwards through the volunteers, through the transport networks. So it was really important to make sure that we still invested in women's sport and gave everyone a great opportunity to experience the tournaments that they came back. And that's really been reinforced because we're seeing mass increase in attendances across Women's Super League and Lionesses matches. We had 47,000 people at Arsenal-Tottenham last month. So people are coming back. We smashed the record again at Wembley for a Lionesses game recently. So I think it's really important to invest in the quality of delivery still for events, as well as not cutting corners across safety and security and transport networks, because we really do need to look after all the client groups involved and spectators.
Okay, very, very interesting. Rick?
I think there's an element of getting the planning right and making sure, certainly from a, again, I look at it from a weather perspective, but making sure that you're getting that planning right early on, because, the better you've planned for, then the less tactical interventions you have to make by surprise, around the event, and they're the ones that become very costly. So I think part of it is making sure that investment is there, but the experience that the people have at the end of the day during the event is what brings them back, I guess. And I say that as a fan, as somebody goes to see Torquay United as often as possible. Somebody's got to do it, So, and in that one, I guess, it's how do we join people up? How do we partner with organisations that make that journey, that, the whole event from the day you leave, time you leave your house to the time you return, how do you make that, one, safe, two, part of the overall experience, so that they go back again? And I think that's part of the event. You know, that doesn't have to be, the event doesn't have to start maybe, and that's, Bev, you sort of touched on that. I don't think the event starts the moment you walk in the stadium. It starts the moment actually when you're planning for it. And there must be, I would guess, opportunities to exploit that, you know, for revenue by using partners and others. So yeah, I think, you know, much really as Bev has said there.
In your experiences, have you come across any, let's say, really notable cases that highlight shortcomings in the way things are done currently from the operations point of view? And if so, feel free to mention any that you had previously experienced. And what are the takeaways from this? Like, what went wrong and what can we take stock for the next event to make sure this doesn't happen again?
I can talk from a host city point of view. That's obviously my area of expertise. But when we looked at lots of major events in the lead up to Women's Euro, we found that there was a trend of not looking after people after the match, after the event, and making sure that they got home okay. So volunteers being there pre-game, but then going home, not being there to show people where to go, signage to get you back to the shuttle bus, get you back to the train station, get you back to the city centre, and just making sure that all the transport networks were there afterwards to get people back to their destination. So that was really a focus for us, about that whole spectator journey doesn't end at 90 minutes. It ends when that person gets back home. And that involved a lot of operational work with rail operators, with the highways, network teams, bringing on board more volunteers from a city point of view, to really make sure you had that whole end-to-end experience. And we didn't have one complaint through the tournament of somebody who didn't get home after that event.
Wow, that's good. Rick?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing around insurance as well in this piece as well, and a culture piece, because Boardmasters down in my neck of the woods down in the southwest was an event that suffered because of weather and had to be cancelled. And there's other events that have been cancelled through weather. That must be a really difficult decision for any organiser to make, and probably quite a costly one as well. And if you're making that on a weather forecast, then, you know, that's quite a leap of faith. You know, I like to think that our forecasts have improved over the decades, but, you know, to get a message 3, 4, 5 days out that says the winds are going to reach this threshold, which it puts you in that position where you have to cancel. You know, that must be a really difficult position to be in, and you know, that's an area I think, you know, that we've learnt from as an organisation. You know, it's you know, plan for these things that potentially could go wrong, and I think it's up to us to feed information into you guys that says these are the sort of things that can go wrong, and it's dynamic and it's complex. If a train stops for instance because of heat and electricity failures or gone into a snowdrift, your spectators are probably going to get off that train, which potentially puts them in more danger, but they will, because if there's no power and there's no heat and they're freezing in a snow, they'll get off and they'll go walking across the fields. You know, so it's learning from not just the experiences in the eventing world, but the experiences in the infrastructure that's supporting that the spectators and people who are paying the bills, you know, to go are going to be experiencing too.
I think, yeah, kind of following on from that is, from the crowd safety perspective, there's quite often a kind of internal conflict with events, where bigger attendance equals more money, you know, number of tickets times cost of ticket and so on. And safety is still, unfortunately, very often seen as a tick box type exercise. Anyone who's dealt with safety in the room will have seen a risk assessment that's been brought out year on year, you know, without consideration of it. And I think a lot of the crowd disasters, of which you know, we could go on and list them. You've all seen them in the media, the recent one in Indonesia and so on. They're usually all caused, especially inside a venue, with poor planning or not understanding what causes accidents. So let more people in because we want more money. We've done a risk assessment before we made that decision that says there's enough fire exits and enough exit capacity. Well, actually, you need to risk assess again, you need to update that, and then that might well be telling you, no, you should not be letting these people in. So there's a lot of failures are caused by these competing pressures, and I think a lack of understanding of what might cause that. Risk assessment says it's okay. If you've not followed through on your mitigations of the risk assessment, then you've not done your job and these disasters happen.
Okay. So starting from you, Paul, then, being the crowd expert. So I think Rick touched earlier about the magical word of culture. So how do different cultures embrace events? How do different people go to the different places? How do they respond to whatever awareness raising about a hazardous meteorological phenomenon, for example, or something like that? What's your experience there?
Yeah, so I mean, crowds do behave differently in different cultural settings. I think there's a nice thing in crowd science where generally a group of people move vaguely in the same way. So when we're calculating exit capacities, whilst we take into account behaviour and psychology, generally when we're looking at that, there's a fairly standardised approach to dealing with that. But how crowds behave is very different, where they choose to go, whether they're under the influence of alcohol and other substances. And for my own work, which a lot of it is in the Middle East, there's a very different culture there in terms of, for example, how dense people want to be packed together. So in a lot of cultures, they will be much more comfortable at higher densities than we might be here, and other cultures may want to be more spaced out since. And interestingly, of course, we've all seen we saw a difference during the COVID pandemic when there was a complete change in culture of crowd behaviour where we all wanted to stay apart for a change instead of all come together, for example, at a concert or a festival. So there's a lot of differences between the crowds that need to be taken into account, and that does affect how you would plan the operations towards those crowds. They need different things, and also the experience of the crowds as well, to bring us back to that non sort of safety aspect, but the more experiential aspect. Different cultures expect different things, and to plan for that, you need to assess what those cultural aspects are, how they influence the crowd behaviour and movement, so that you can then plan correctly for them.
Okay, Bev?
We kind of had a bit of an emerging culture around women's football this summer. It's the first time we've staged the event since 2005, and had 574,000 fans coming to the tournament, which is amazing. But we had to, at each ticket sales phase, do a deep dive into who was buying tickets and what the audience was like, and we felt it would be a big family audience, more young people, more women. That's what we'd see at Lionesses or FA Women's Cup finals at Wembley, but we needed to track that throughout, and we ended up with 51% female purchasers, but some matches had a different dynamic. So the opening game at Old Trafford with 68,000 people was 31% young people, under 16, so we put on far more safeguarding officers, welfare, we put on a fan zone on site at Old Trafford in the car park, more volunteers to make sure that we were looking after that audience demographic. And we just found, because a lot of these people were new to football events, that we needed to up our communications, and UEFA launched a tournament app for the first time, lots of CRM, lots of email communications to help people to plan their day, plan their travel, how they got there and back again afterwards, where they could go to the fan zone, what was happening, what they could take into the stadium, the bag policies. All of this needed communicating. We also worked very closely with the 15 competing nations who are coming over to understand their fan dynamic, because for the first time we saw more and more international fans coming over to the tournament. So we had 110,000 international fans come over. We delivered 12 fan marches, shutting down city centre streets to allow the Orange Parade, the Dutch bus with 3,000 fans marching behind, to march through the streets and all arrive at the stadium at once, which, you know, didn't want to overload the turnstiles all at once. So I think insight and data underpinned everything we did, and just sense checking along the way, and that was so useful from a safety and security planning, because we could give that to the lead police force, we could give that to the local police forces to help them plan their response. And also, from a WEM Zero point of view, it's less public disorder that you might see at some events. It was more counter-terrorism and making sure with a huge female and family audience we weren't creating targets, especially with thousands of fans walking through the streets, and had to handle that almost like you'd handle a protest, because it's a large gathering of people which could become a target.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I think that it's a fascinating subject. People's behaviour, you know, crowd behaviour is, for me, is becoming one of the most significant parts, you know, also of weather business as well, if that makes sense. You know, part of what we do is, as I say, stick out national severe weather warnings, because we want people to respond in a set way, which is going to help keep them safe, reduce the load off the infrastructure. And we know that weather conditions will make people behave in set ways. You know, when it's hot, they hit the alcohol, they're outside in the sun, and we know that that has a knock-on effect into crowd management. But I think even when you get down to individuals, there's work to be done there. If you want to maximise the efficiency of an event, but also maximise the revenue to, you know, encourage people to use the drink area, but, you know, in an acceptable way, for example, then you need to understand how they're all operating, and all these sort of things linked together. There was a fascinating study done in the United States about fatalities around tornadoes. So the National Weather Service in the States puts a tornado warning out about 20 minutes before one's due to hit. They like to be really specific. And if you get a tornado warning, you get in your basement. That's how you stay safe. They did a study to see where all the accidents, you know, the injuries and the fatalities were. And the group of people that are most affected by tornadoes were male, between 15, 16 and about 35. I haven't got that exactly right, but you get the gist. So the question is why? Why is it that particular group? Well, because they're still in that sort of mindset of a young adult, and, you know, if somebody says, "Oh, where's the cat?" They're the ones that are going to come out of the basement and go looking for the cat at the wrong time. You know, so even in our world, in the world of weather, we're thinking about how can we target you with specific information based on the way you respond, that's going to make you do what we'd like you to do rather than what your sort of natural instinct is going to do. And I think it feeds back into your crowd control as well.